When I woke up from brain surgery, my head was wrapped in bandages. I was groggy, scared, and completely alone. My daughter had told me she couldn't be there because of a work trip. I didn't argue. I just said, okay, because what else could I say? I didn't have any other choice. 3 days later, I saw a photo of her. She was at Disney World, smiling in mouse ears, pushing her mother-in-law's wheelchair like it was the happiest day of her life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I just sent her one text message, and after that, her world changed. But before I tell you what happened next, don't forget to like this video, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. My name is Evelyn Carson. I'm 68 years old. And for most of my life, I've handled things on my own. Not because I thought I was Superwoman, but because I learned early that if I didn't take care of things, nobody else would. When my husband left and our daughter Rachel was just 9, it was up to me. I was the one who kept the lights on. I sold my wedding ring so she could get braces. I worked extra hours in medical billing just to make sure she could go to college without drowning in debt. And I never once brought it up to make her feel guilty, because to me, that's what love looks like, showing up, even when no one asks. But nothing in life prepared me for the moment an MRI technician looked at me with 2 kind eyes and told me they found a shadow behind my left eye. He said I needed to see a brain surgeon, fast. I didn't cry or panic. I just nodded like he'd told me it might rain later and drove home in silence. My hands felt heavy on the steering wheel. The world suddenly felt louder, my sight a little fuzzy, like everything was folding in on itself. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something big and dark. 2 days later, I sat across from a neurosurgeon who explained it wasn't cancer, thank God, but it was pushing against a critical part of my brain. If we didn't operate soon, I could start having seizures, lose my memory, or worse, suffer a stroke. He recommended surgery within 6 weeks. I smiled, thanked him, then went home and sat in the dark for a long time. There was only one person I could tell, Rachel. And even then, I hesitated. Not because we had a big falling out or anything, we still called each other on holidays, texted every now and then, but there was a distance. Like I was watching her life through a window I couldn't open. Still, I called her. I said, I need you. And it was the first time I'd said those words to anyone in years. She didn't pause. She said she'd be there, just tell her the date. I told her mid-February. She said she'd come from Atlanta, spend the weekend, help me get home, make sure I was okay. And just like that, a weight lifted. I hadn't felt that kind of comfort in a long time. I started preparing, washed the guest sheets, bought her favorite snacks, even pulled out the soft pink blanket she always loved. But then, 2 weeks before the surgery, she called again. Her voice was upbeat, a little too upbeat. Right away, I knew something was off. She said, Mom, I've got a bit of a conflict. I waited. There was a long pause. Then she said her husband's company had planned a last-minute leadership retreat in Miami, and all the spouses were expected to come. It was already paid for. She tried to sound sorry, but it felt like she was reading from a script. I held the phone tighter but didn't say a word. She filled the silence with more excuses, it's just really bad timing, I'll come the week after, I promise. But brain surgery isn't something you can just reschedule. It's not a dentist appointment or a haircut. It's a swollen head. It's confusion and weakness and needing someone to help you shower so you don't fall. And still, I didn't say any of that. I just said, okay. I understand. Because old habits are hard to break. And a part of me still hoped that if I didn't make her feel bad, she might change her mind. I hung up the phone and just stared at the wall. The room felt quieter than ever, so quiet it was almost loud. Then I did something I didn't expect. I just sat there, completely still. Not crying. Not yelling. Not even texting her back. I just stared at that photo, at the face I had memorized since the day she was born. The little girl who once held my hand so tightly on her first day of school. The one I stayed up with all night when she had the flu. The one I worked 2 jobs for, just to make sure she had everything she needed. And now, here she was, beaming in front of a castle, like nothing in the world was wrong. Like I wasn't lying in bed, stitched up and dizzy, barely able to lift a glass of water without help. The worst part wasn't the picture. It wasn't even the trip. It was how unsurprised I felt. Somewhere deep down, I think I knew this was coming the second I picked up the phone to ask for her help. I just didn't want to admit it. So yeah, I packed my hospital bag alone. Filled out the medical forms with my neighbor Donna as my witness. I tried not to let the bitterness in, because I couldn't afford to be angry. Not when I needed every bit of strength just to face what was ahead. The morning of my surgery, I woke up before the alarm. Not because I was scared, but because my body's just used to showing up when it matters. Like it always has. I brushed my teeth, looked in the mirror, and thought, this is the last time I'll look like myself for a while. I knew what was coming: staples, swelling, maybe even memory loss. I just didn't know I'd be facing it all on my own. At the hospital, the receptionist asked if someone would be joining me. I told her, no, just me. Her smile slipped. For a second. She handed me a clipboard and told me to wait. The waiting room smelled like bleach and nerves. I scrolled through old texts to distract myself, saw Rachel's last message: let me know how it goes. Love you. Just words. No call. No check-in. Just a polite sentence that felt more like a checkbox than actual care. They wheeled me back. I stared up at the ceiling tiles, trying to breathe evenly as the anesthesiologist spoke. Then, black. When I woke up, it was chaos. Beeping machines. A nurse moving behind me. My head felt like someone had rearranged it with a crowbar. My throat was raw, mouth bone dry. I could barely move, but still, I looked around, hoping to see someone I knew. Just one face. Just one person who came. There was no one. The nurse said, "You're okay." But I wasn't. Not really. Because that was the moment it hit me: no one was coming. Not today. Not tomorrow. And the pain of that? It went deeper than any incision ever could. The surgeon said the procedure went well. I nodded like I was listening, but I barely heard him. I was too busy wondering if Rachel had even thought about me. If she'd mentioned me to anyone. Or if I had already been quietly erased from her picture-perfect vacation. 2 days later, I was discharged. Alone. I was still out of it from the meds, with gauze around my head and a stack of instructions I couldn't even focus on. The hospital called a medical cab. I nearly collapsed getting out, and the driver had to walk me to the door. Donna, my neighbor, saw me from across the street and rushed over. She helped me inside, asked if I needed anything. I told her no, even though I hadn't eaten. Hadn't showered. Couldn't stop my hands from shaking. But I didn't want her to see just how far I'd fallen. Once I was alone again, I lay on the bed, body aching all over. The nausea rising like a wave. I grabbed my phone, mostly just to distract myself. I opened Facebook without thinking. And that's when I saw it. A photo. Tagged by one of Rachel's college friends. There she was, right in the center, standing in front of Cinderella's castle. Pink tank top, Mickey Mouse ears, big sunglasses, smiling like she had not a care in the world. I could even see the gap in her front teeth she used to hate. Her husband had his arm around his mom, who was waving from a Disney scooter like she was in a parade. The caption read, "Family Magic 2025, making memories that last forever." My thumb froze. My heart thudded in my ears. I zoomed in just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But there she was, Rachel. Laughing. Pointing at something. Off camera. Happy. Free. Not like someone who had a mother fresh out of brain surgery, lying alone in a dark house, trying not to fall apart. She was swiping through her phone when a video her husband filmed popped up. It showed her helping his mom into a boat. He said, "Careful, mama, hold on tight." Then, in the background, someone, maybe one of the in-laws, said, "You're the best daughter-in-law ever." That was the moment it all hit her. It wasn't the laughter or the castle they were at, but the word daughter. Because she was the one who had raised her, walked out of a courtroom alone holding a sleeping baby, skipped meals so her child could have new shoes, rubbed her back through contractions. And now, her daughter was feeding churros to someone else's mom, smiling like the last 3 decades of their life together had been nothing more than a phase she outgrew. She sat there, staring at the phone for what felt like 20 minutes. It was getting hot in her hand. The only thing she could think to do was type one sentence. It wasn't angry or dramatic, just straight to the point, cutting through everything. She hoped the fireworks were loud enough to drown out the guilt. She hit send, then closed the app. She set the phone down on the nightstand and lay back in the dark, her heartbeat thudding in her chest, wondering when she had stopped being her daughter's mother and started just being another obligation. Less than a minute later, the phone rang. Her daughter's name popped up on the screen. She didn't even flinch. She didn't hesitate to hit the volume button and let the call fade into silence. She already knew what her daughter would say, and she didn't want to hear it wrapped in sugar-coated excuses. A couple of minutes later, the voicemail came through. She tapped it and held the phone to her ear. There it was. Her daughter's voice, shaky and breathless, as if she had just realized how bad it looked. "Mom," she said, and there was a long pause. It felt like her daughter was trying to gather the strength to keep talking. "I know how this looks, but it's not what you think." Those words made her teeth grind. She knew exactly what she had seen, and it was exactly what had happened. But her daughter didn't want her to see it that way. "We were supposed to be in Miami," her daughter explained quickly. "But Greg's parents surprised us with Disney tickets at the last minute, and I didn't want to make a scene. They were so excited, and his mom's health is getting worse. She really wanted this trip, and she kept talking about it. Her voice sped up as if she couldn't stop. I didn't think it would matter if I stayed a few extra days. I thought you'd be resting. Greg said it'd be better if we went, and I didn't want to let anyone down. And there it was, the quiet truth she hadn't wanted to admit. She didn't want to let them down, so she let her mom down instead. Again. The worst part was how casually she said it, like it was just a scheduling error, not a deliberate choice to leave her mom alone in a house after brain surgery, with nothing but silence and health warnings. While she went off to enjoy a theme park with someone else's mother in a wheelchair. Her voice cracked toward the end, whispering, "Please call me back. I'll explain everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." But the thing was, she had hurt her. Maybe not on purpose, but in a way that was even worse, cold, careless neglect that cuts deeper than outright anger. It said, "You're not worth making a hard choice for." She sat there, letting the voicemail play over and over in her head until the phone battery died and the screen went black. By morning, there were texts from her daughter. Each one shorter, more desperate. "Are you okay? Please just answer. Can we talk?" But she didn't answer. Not because she wanted to punish her daughter, but because she didn't trust herself not to say something she would regret. She wanted her daughter to sit with that silence and feel what it was like to not be considered, to not be a priority, to be just a footnote in someone else's highlight reel. That afternoon, she opened her banking app and saw the reminder for the monthly transfer she'd been sending to her daughter's account. For over a year, I'd been sending money every month, like clockwork. My thumb hovered over the transfer button, but this time, I just swiped it away. No big speech, no dramatic explanation, just a quiet decision to stop being the safety net she only reached for when it was convenient. I thought that would be the end of it, but 2 days later, I got an email. Not from Rachel, but from Greg. The subject line said, "Following up," and the message itself was 2 lines long. "Hi Evelyn, just wanted to check in. Rachel mentioned the usual transfer didn't come through. Everything okay on your end?" Something about the way he worded it, calm, entitled, with the hint that maybe I was the one being unreliable, made my stomach twist. He didn't ask how I was doing, post-surgery. Didn't mention the hospital. Didn't thank me for the years of support that had kept them in their house when Greg's commissions had dried up. He just wanted to know where the money was. And that told me everything I needed to know. Rachel wasn't the only one who saw me as a walking ATM with a heartbeat. I didn't reply. I just deleted the email and blocked his address. Later that day, Rachel texted, asking if the transfer had gotten stuck. I finally responded with a single line, "I'm recovering. Please respect that. No money this month." Her response came instantly, a flood of messages about their mortgage, Mason's school fees, how they had a payment plan for the braces they ordered. I could almost feel her panic as she tried to explain. She danced around the words, "We need it," but that's what she meant. Not a single question about how I was doing, not a, "How's your head?" or, "Are you managing okay?" Just a list of their struggles and complaints, about how withholding money was so unlike me. And she was right, it was unlike me. For decades, I had been the backup plan, the one who always stepped in to smooth things over. But for the first time, I wasn't. And the empty space I left must have felt huge. That night, I turned off my phone and placed it face down. I lit a candle by the kitchen window, not for her, not as a prayer, but just to mark the moment. A small flicker of something quiet and defiant. A way to say, "I'm here, and I matter," even if no one else remembered. It had been almost 2 weeks since I last replied, no texts, no emails, not even those casual WhatsApp messages Rachel liked to send when she wanted to dig for information. I hoped the silence would hold, that she'd get the message and let it die down. But people like Greg don't leave things unfinished, especially when money is involved. So, sure enough, on a Thursday afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. Not a soft, neighborly tap, but that quick, purposeful knock you give when you feel entitled to be let in. I stood behind the door for a moment, just listening, and then I heard his voice, low, familiar, smug. "Hey Evelyn, it's Greg. Mind letting me in for a second?" My whole body stiffened. This man hadn't even asked how my surgery went, but here he was on my porch like it was just a regular visit. I opened the inner door but kept the screen latched, standing there in my robe with my surgical wrap still covering half my scalp. And he had the nerve to smile like we were just catching up after church, like I didn't just have brain surgery, like I owed him the comfort of small talk. "Rachel's in the car," he said, nodding over his shoulder. "She didn't want to come. And if you're still upset." I looked past him and saw her in the passenger seat, head down, pretending to scroll on her phone, too scared to face me. That told me everything I needed to know. They had rehearsed this. She'd sent him to do the talking so she wouldn't have to feel the heat. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. He shifted awkwardly, clearing his throat, trying to sound reasonable. Look, I know things got a little messy, but this whole freeze-out thing, it's not healthy, Evelyn. It's dramatic. Rachel's been really stressed, and now the mortgage is behind, Mason's tuition is due next month, and you cutting us off without a word, it's not like you. Greg's words hit me, not because they were shocking, but because they showed me exactly how little I mattered to them. He spoke like I was some kind of service, an obligation that could be dropped whenever they felt like it, not a 68-year-old woman who had been paying their bills and supporting them for years. I folded my arms, staying silent, and that's when he leaned in, lowering his voice like he was about to reveal some great truth. What he said next I will never forget. Not because it stunned me, but because it confirmed everything I'd been slowly realizing. Let's be honest, Evelyn. You were never part of our long-term plans. Your background's nice when it's convenient, but exhausting when you need things. You're not really her mom anymore, not in the way that counts. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I just looked at him. Because there it was, the truth, right out in the open. Not sugar-coated, not softened, just cold and cruel. He saw me as excess, like a subscription they forgot to cancel or a bonus they didn't want anymore. And worse, I knew those words didn't just come from him. They'd been said by Rachel before. She'd called me exhausting. She'd said I always needed something. And that line, not in the way that counts, was too specific to be made up on the spot. It had been said, rehearsed, probably more than once. I let it hang in the air for a moment, then nodded slowly. Thanks. That clears things up, I said, calmly, deliberately. I closed the door, locked the latch, and walked back into the kitchen. As if I hadn't just been gutted, as if my chest wasn't tight with a mix of grief and fury. At the sink, I turned on the water, letting it run while I stared out the window, watching Greg's car pull away down the driveway. The silence that followed was different now, like a blanket I could finally wrap myself in. That night, I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out the folder where I kept my will, and made changes. I crossed Rachel's name off as the beneficiary. And instead left what little I had to a women's shelter in a town a few hours away, one I used to donate time to before my back gave out. Then I wrote a letter. Just a simple one. In case anything happened to me before I could say it out loud. 5 sentences. No drama, just the truth. I gave you everything I had. I needed you once, and you gave me nothing. That's not a debt, it's a decision. And now I'm making mine. Afterward, I brewed a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the neighborhood lights. I thought about all the mothers, grandmothers, and aunts out there, quietly funding other people's lives, just to be tolerated. Just to be included in group texts, birthday invites, or emergency calls. Never thanked. Never counted. Never prioritized. And for the first time, I felt something like freedom, bitter, unfamiliar, but freedom nonetheless. Because once someone tells you that you're not part of their plan, you stop begging for a seat at the table. You start building your own. After Greg's visit, the house went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that comes from distance, from disconnection. And I didn't fight it. I didn't fill the space with calls, or news, or Netflix chatter. I just let it settle, like dust in a room no one enters anymore. It felt strange at first, going whole days without my phone buzzing. No texts from Rachel. No pictures of Mason's drawings to guilt me into softness. No polite check-ins pretending not to ask about money. I started cooking smaller meals, freezing leftovers, walking a little farther each day as my incision healed. And even though the swelling in my face had gone down, the swelling in my chest hadn't. Not yet. Because there was still that part of me, the foolish, mother-shaped part, that hoped she might come back, different. Or at least come back. It had been days, then weeks, and still, nothing. But one afternoon, Donna, my neighbor, stopped by with a tray of lemon bars. She made small talk, and then, almost by accident, she mentioned something that made my heart jump. I saw your daughter the other day, she said casually. My eyebrows shot up, and I tried not to let hope get the best of me. She was at the pharmacy, Donna continued, looked tired, worn out. They say Greg's business is in trouble, and I think they're behind on their mortgage. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, and thanked her for the bars. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closet where Rachel's old clothes were still packed in boxes. I hadn't unpacked them. It was like the cracks in her life were finally showing, just like I'd known they would. When people live on borrowed time, it always catches up with them. I didn't feel happy about it. There was no satisfaction, just a kind of quiet confirmation. Rachel hadn't texted me since my last reply, not even for my birthday, which came and went with a voicemail from Mason saying, "Mom says hi." No call from Rachel. I ignored it, just like I had the other times. Instead of letting myself fall into loneliness, I decided to try something else. I joined a widows group that met every Tuesday at the library. The women were in their 70s and 80s, sharp, funny, and kind. They had been through tough times, but learned how to laugh through it all. We drank weak coffee, traded recipes, and at first, I only shared the lighter parts of my story. Eventually, though, I told them about Rachel, the surgery, and how she had disappeared. Not one of them was surprised. One woman, Clara, just nodded and said, "It's always the ones we give the most to who forget first," and those words stuck with me for days. One afternoon, while going through some old papers, I found a folder of Rachel's childhood photos. There was one in particular, her holding a paper crown she made in 3rd grade, smiling with glue on her fingers. I stared at it for what felt like forever, watching the sunlight move across the kitchen floor. I wasn't angry anymore. Just sat in that quiet, resigned way you feel when you realize you've been holding on to someone who isn't the same anymore. I put the folder back but kept that photo. I slipped it into my nightstand like a bookmark for a story that would never get finished. Then, one day, when things had started to feel normal again, the doorbell rang. It was mid-afternoon, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked out the window, and my heart skipped a beat. There she was, Rachel. No Greg, no Mason, no car in the driveway. Just her, standing on the porch with a duffel bag and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. I opened the door slowly. I didn't say anything. She stood there. For a moment, then whispered, "I left him." Her words were soft, but they hit hard, not because I didn't believe her, but because I knew this was how it would unravel. Not with a plan or dignity, but with a crash. "Can I come in?" she asked. And I stepped aside. Not because I had forgiven her, but because I needed to understand what had brought her here. She sat at the kitchen table where Greg had sat weeks before, hands wrapped around the same mug I'd offered him. This time, it stayed empty. I waited for her to speak again, and when she did, her voice was flat, stripped of all the walls she'd built up around herself. "He told me to pick," she said, eyes red but dry. "He said if I wanted to keep the house, the car, the stability, I had to stop letting you guilt me. Stop letting your drama get in the way." In that moment, I knew I was done defending him. She looked at me then, really looked, like she hadn't in a long time, and said, "I lied about everything. We were always going to Disney. I just didn't want to be the bad guy, so I became something worse instead." I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. We both knew that. But I didn't ask her to leave either, because this wasn't about fixing things, not yet, anyway. It wasn't about fixing things or pretending we could go back to how it was. It was about sitting with the mess and deciding if either of us had the energy to deal with it. Rachel didn't ask for money, just help. And that, right there, told me something had changed. When she said it, help didn't feel like some kind of exchange anymore, like it used to. It felt real. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, and the silence between us stretched out, thick and heavy. It was like a rope neither of us could tug on without it snapping completely. But in that quiet, something important hit me. Maybe we wouldn't go back to what we had before. Maybe we couldn't. But maybe we could start something new, something different. Something real. That night, Rachel didn't move in. I didn't offer. It wasn't going to be that kind of reunion. You know, the dramatic kind in movies with tears, hugs, and quick forgiveness. What had broken between us couldn't be patched up with just one emotional visit. Deep down, I think we both knew that. So, instead, she stayed at a motel down the street. The kind with paper-thin walls and a flickering vacancy sign. Every day after work, she'd come by around 5, not expecting dinner, not asking for anything, just sitting at the kitchen table. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. It was like she was waiting for something to fall into place, something neither of us could name. At first, I kept my distance. I spoke to her like she was a polite stranger I'd run into at the store, careful not to let my guard down too quickly. It wasn't just about the hurt. It was about years of giving, of caring, of mothering someone who had grown to resent being mothered while still needing everything I could offer. That kind of tension doesn't fade in a week or a month. But then one day, she showed up with a bag of groceries, and without saying a word, just started putting things away like it was the most normal thing in the world. I watched her, waiting for her to ask for something, but she didn't. Finally, I said, "You don't have to keep showing up." And she just looked at me and said, "I'm not doing it for you." And I knew she meant it. Something in her face had changed, like she'd finally seen her life for what it was without a backup plan, and didn't like the view. Slowly, the conversations became deeper. Not just small talk, not just regrets, but real, hard things. Things we'd never talked about when she was younger because I was always focused on making sure she had everything she needed while she was pulling away, not noticing what I was giving up in the process. One night, she told me how Greg used to mock me behind my back, calling me Eeyore because I was quiet, saying I used guilt as a weapon. When she saw my face, she stopped mid-sentence and whispered, I didn't realize how much of that I started to believe until I started saying it too. I didn't give her a free pass. I didn't let her off the hook. But I did say, you're not the first daughter to forget her mother's humanity, and you won't be the last. She nodded, and I think that was the most she could hope for. By the third week, she brought Mason with her, just for an hour. He wanted to see me. When he hugged me and said, Grandma, you look less sick now, it nearly broke me. Not from sadness, but from how simple and loving it was. Children are so unburdened when adults stop feeding them stories. He asked if we could bake cookies like we used to, and we did. Rachel sat quietly at the table, watching us. Her eyes were glassy, but dry, like she was seeing something she didn't think she deserved to see anymore. After that, things didn't get easier, but they did get realer. Rachel found part-time work at a clinic, not glamorous, but honest. She started budgeting her own money. She started turning down help, not out of pride, but because she needed to be accountable. When the will came up, I told her plainly, I changed it. She just nodded, didn't argue, didn't cry. She said, I would have too. And that told me everything I needed to know. Trust wasn't rebuilt yet, maybe it wouldn't be fully. But at least the weight was shifting. At least she wasn't trying to slip back into the version of her life where I carried everything while she sat back and smiled from the passenger seat. Then, one day, Rachel showed up with an envelope and said, it's from Greg's lawyer. I opened it, and there it was, divorce papers. Signed, processed, final. I didn't smile or react. I just folded them back into the envelope and said, good, because there was nothing more to say. Not about him. Not anymore. By the second month, Rachel had her own place. It was small and plain, but it was hers. I helped her move in, not by paying for it, not by furnishing it, but by showing up with takeout and holding the door open. While she carried boxes. I watched her make that place into something stable, something she didn't depend on anyone for. And in that moment, I knew we were finally on new ground. One afternoon, she asked if she could come by on Sundays. Nothing formal, no big expectations, just time together. I said yes, and I meant it. Because I wasn't doing it for her anymore, I was doing it for me. I was doing it for the part of me that still believed we could have something real between us, as long as we both showed up as whole people, not just roles or titles or dependencies. Now, when people ask about Rachel, I don't say we've fixed everything. I say, we're learning each other all over again. Like strangers who used to share a house but never really talked. And that's the truth. She's not my little girl anymore, and I'm not just her mother. We're two grown women, each with our own scars and history, and we both have choices to live with. But we're here, sitting at the same table. Some days, that feels like a miracle. Some days, it feels like work. But both are better than silence. I don't know where we'll end up or how many more years we'll have together, but I do know this, I'm no longer just the background, the emergency fund, or the holiday extra. I'm Evelyn. And for the first time in a long, long time, I'm not begging to be chosen. I'm just living with a clear mind, my name back in my mouth, and a heart that finally beats for me, too. And that feels really good. That's it for today. What would you have done in her place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing what you all think. And hey, if this story hit you, check out these videos too. You won't want to miss them. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments.